Good morning, friends. Now, in this session, we are going to have a look at summary and analysis of chapter 4 and chapter 5. Now, first we'll have the summary of chapter 4. As summer ends and news of the rebellion spreads to other farms by way of pigeons released by Snowball and Napoleon, Jones spends most of his time in a pub complaining about his troubles to two neighboring farmers, Pilkington and Jones, and Frederick. In October, Jones and a group of men arrive at Animal Farm and attempt to seize control of it. Snowball turns out to be an extraordinary tactician and, with the help of the other animals, drives Jones and his men away. The animals then celebrate their victory in what they call the Battle of Cowshed. Now we'll have the analysis of chapter 4. Snowball and Napoleon's decision to send pigeons to neighboring farms to spread news of Animal Farm is, like their creation of Animal Hero First Class at the end of the chapter, an attempt to heighten the gravity and scope of the rebellion. By informing other animals about Animal Farm, the pigs hope to instigate rebellions elsewhere and eventually live in the world depicted in Old Major's dream. The scene of Jones commiserating in the Red Lion with Pilkington and Frederick portrays the humans as exactly the greedy, self-centered beings that the animals wish to overthrow. Although the two neighboring farmers sympathize with Jones in principle, Orwell states that each is secretly wondering whether he could somehow turn Jones' misfortune to his own advantage. Note also that Pilkington's farm, Foxwood, is in a disgraceful condition and that Frederick is perpetually involved in lawsuits and has a name of driving hard bargains. In direct contrast to the principles of animalism, the humans live by a credo of self-interest and desire for material gain. Of course, the reader has already seen how Napoleon is betraying the principles of animalism as he becomes more and more like these men in the pub. According to Frederick and Pilkington, the animals are rebelling against the laws of nature, with nature in this context referring to the world where humans control all aspects of animals' lives and use them for their own material gain. Of course, what seems natural to the humans is not what seems natural to the animals, and it is worth noting that all attempts in the novel to change the natures of both humans and animals fail, driven by fear and their perception that other animals at neighboring farms are beginning to become inspired by the rebels' example. Jones' attempt to take back what is his, but his attempt at military prowess in this case only further depicts him as impotent and inept. After being muted by the pigeons, Jones is knocked into a dung heap, a fitting place for him in the eyes of his animal enemies. His running from the farm concludes a scene obviously serious for the characters, but with its panic and application of Caesarean tactics to a barnyard melee comic to the reader. Boxer's teary-eyed concern over the possible death of the stable lad reinforces his simple-mindedness and foreshadows the fact that he will be unable to survive in a place as harsh as Animal Farm is soon to be. The image of the great horse trying to run the boy over with his hoop while he laments, "Who will not believe that I did not do this on purpose, contrasts the one of Snowball, with the blood dripping from his wounds, stating, "War is war. The only good human being is a dead one." Unlike Boxer, who wishes no real harm even to his enemies, Snowball cares little for the possible regrets one of his soldiers may face. To him, death is an inevitable byproduct of revolution, as he remarks during his funeral oration for the dead sheep. The chapter ends with the implication that Animal Farm is becoming a place grounded more in military might than agrarian industry. The creation of military decorations, the naming of the battle, and the decision to fire Jones' gun twice a year all suggest the animal's love of ceremony and the slow but sure transformation of Animal Farm into a place governed by martial law more than the seven commandments of animalism. Now we'll have a look at the summary of chapter 5. Winter comes and Molly works less and less. Eventually, Clover discovers that Molly is being bribed off Animal Farm by one of Pilkington's men, who eventually wins her loyalties. Molly disappears, and the pigeons report seeing her standing outside a pub, sporting one of the ribbons that she swayed coveted. That she always coveted. The pigs increase their influence on the farm, deciding all questions of policy and then offering their decisions to the animals, who must ratify them by a majority vote. Snowball and Napoleon continue their fervent debates, the greatest of which occurs over the building of a windmill on a knoll. Snowball argues in favor of the windmill, which he is certain will eventually become a labor saving device. Napoleon argues against it, saying that building the windmill will take time and effort away from the more important task of producing food. The two also disagree on whether they should, as Napoleon thinks, amass an armory of guns, or, as Snowball thinks, send out more pigeons to neighboring farms to spread news of the rebellion. On the Sunday that the plan for the windmill is to be put to a vote, Napoleon calls out 9 ferocious dogs who chase Snowball off the farm. Napoleon then announces that all debates will stop and institutes a number of other new rules for the farm. 3 weeks after Snowball's escape, Napoleon surprises everybody by announcing that the windmill will be built. He sends Squealer to the animals to explain that the windmill was really Napoleon's idea all along and that the plans for it were stolen from him by Snowball. This is the summary of chapter 5. Now we'll have a look at the analysis of chapter 5. The defection of Molly marks her as an even greater materialist than she had appeared to be earlier in the novel. The fact that she is bribed away from Animal Farm with sugar and ribbons, 2 items that Snowball condemned as unnecessary for liberty in chapter 2, shows her desire for luxury without making the necessary sacrifices to obtain it. She is a defector from the policies of Animal Farm and is never mentioned by the other animals, who find her abandonment of animalism and the rebellion shameful. Despite their implied condemnation, however, the pigeons do report that she appeared to be enjoying herself much more so than the animals who remain on the farm. Molly may be politically shallow in the eyes of her former comrades, but she does manage to secure herself much more comfortable life, which raises the question of whether one is better off living well with one's enemies or suffering with one's comrades. The novel eventually suggests that Molly did, in fact, make a wise decision in leaving Animal Farm, although to be fair, she did not do so because of any political or moral motives. At this point, the pigs have gained more power Earlier they were supervisors, but now they decide all questions of farm policy. While these decisions still need to be ratified by the other animals, Orwell suggests that the pigs are gaining ground at a slow but steady rate, but with the bitterly hard weather that arrives that winter, so do bitterly hard debates increase between Snowball and Napoleon. Actually, debate is hardly the correct term since only Snowball attempts to use rhetoric and logic to sway the other animals. Napoleon uses a number of what Schuyler will later call tactics to get his way. For example, Napoleon spends time during the week training the sheep to break into their four legs good, two legs bad, bleating during crucial moments in Snowball's speeches. Packing the packing the packing the meetings with his own unwitting supporters is Napoleon's calculated strategy here. His unleashing of the nine dogs later in the chapter is Napoleon's ultimate debating technique. Violence, not oratory, is how Napoleon settles disagreements. The windmill itself is a symbol of technological progress. Snowball wants it to be built because he thinks it will bring to the farm a degree of self sufficiency which accords with the principles of animalism. Napoleon, however, cares nothing for the windmill and even urinates on Snowball's plans for it because he is only concerned with establishing his totalitarian rule. At the debate on the windmill, Snowball argues that after it is built, the animals will only need to work 3 days a week, while Napoleon argues that if they wasted time on the windmill, they would all starve to death. Thus, Snowball is a leader who looks forward and considers the future of his nation, while Napoleon thinks only of the present, since his vision of the future is one in which he is in full control over animals who have no time for leisure activities. This is again emphasized when Snowball argues for spreading news of the rebellion so that eventually all animals will rise against oppression. While Napoleon wants to create a stockpile of weapons that he can then turn, if needed, on his own citizens. In short, Snowball's vision of life with the windmill is like Moses' sugar candy mountain, an immensely desirable yet fantastic place. Note that Benjamin does not endorse either pig and their slogans have no effect on him. Like the reader, he is doubtful of Snowball's scheme and wary of Napoleon's maneuvers. All Benjamin believes is what he knows for sure, the sum total of which is that, windmill or no windmill, life will go on as it always had gone on, that is, badly. This cynical remark is perhaps the most important statement in the entire novel, for despite all of the ideologies, plans, battle schemes, debates, betrayals, sound, and fury of the animals, the end result is that they return full circle to the exact same life they tried to avoid. As he does several times throughout the novel, Orwell speaks directly to the reader through Benjamin. Napoleon's newfound power is based wholly on the threat of violence, as demonstrated in his winning the debate with Snowball by driving him off the farm. His decision to end all debates reflects his insatiable need for power. Debates, when conducted in the spirit of inquiry and discovery of viewpoints, are crucial to a government that wants its citizens to take part in their own rule. Napoleon, however, views debates as unnecessary because he will permit no questioning of his command and wants to um, silence any disapproval. Like Big Brother, the like Big Brother, the personification of the all-powerful government in Orwell's 1984, Napoleon begins to become an object to the way in which Napoleon seizes power, the dogs begin to growl and the sheep bleed their four legs good slogan over and over. This combination of relentless propaganda and threats of violence comprise Napoleon's philosophy of leadership, the same philosophy behind the government in 1984. Napoleon's disinterment of Major's skull in his way of allying himself with the beloved father of animalism, another piece of admittedly brilliant propaganda. Squealer displays even more of his skill at double talk in this chapter, as he did previously with the milk and apples. Squealer paints Napoleon's crimes in a light that makes Napoleon more like a martyr than a dictator, calling Napoleon's takeover a sacrifice and stating that leadership is not a pleasure. The officious pig manages to, as was said earlier about him, turn black into white. Even more invidious is Squealer's ability to rewrite history. He tells the animals that Snowball's part in the Battle of the Cowshed was much exaggerated, and once Napoleon decides to proceed with the building of the windmill, that the idea for it was Napoleon's all along. Again, as in 1984, Orwell attacks the ways in which those who rise to power revise the past in order to keep their grip on the present and future. These tactics, as Squealer calls them, allow Napoleon to always present himself in the most favorable light, and if an animal still objects, the three dogs accompanying Squealer serve as ample deterrent faced with Squealer's skipping words and the mouths of the dogs. An animal has hardly a choice but to submit to the new regime. This is the summary and analysis of chapter 5. In the next lecture, we are going to have a look at summary and analysis of chapter 6 and chapter 7. Thank you.